Okay, then in 2012, you already said you became a pro punter, and you told me it was mainly golf, but you did some football, cricket, NFL, NBA. So why did you start with those sports? Was it just because what you used
Well,
to?
golf was what sort of specialised in most, and I was doing it with a friend who big modeler, and it was the sport that made most sense, and you know we were able to put pretty large volumes through, whether it be in shops, whether it be online, um, a lot of each way, and so that was the main sort of focus at the time. There was then sort of progressed pre 2014. We were doing some football. So you used to find that particularly early in the week, there was quite a lot of soft pricing associated with football. So you'd come to a shop and the coupons wouldn't be updated relative to online. The biggest problem with football was you could get some soft prices, but you'd churn through accounts like nobody's business, and so you having to weigh up the balance between keeping accounts and betting in football. I mean, I'll give you one quite interesting story regarding football. So 2014 World Cup, Bet365 at the time had a promotion which on the World Cup where if your team lost on penalties, they would refund your bets. And normally with these promotions, you might be allowed £100 on, you might be allowed £50 on. And on this promotion, there was no limit to it. So we ended up having 15,000 each way on Argentina at 4-1. So that, they, in the semi-finals, they beat Netherlands on penalties. So when it went to penalties, we weren't too concerned because we knew worst case you get your stake back. So the interesting part of the story more is that in the final, they played Germany, who had just beaten Brazil, absolutely hammered them in the semi-final. But my wife is German-Canadian, so she was obviously a big fan of Germany. So we sat there in the bar, quite a few friends on, watching the final, and she's obviously cheering on Germany, and we're all cheering on Argentina, and obviously she's like, we're very excited about Germany winning in extra time, and they're going, oh, there's probably 75,000 reasons you didn't want that to happen, but it's one of the problems you have with betting at times is that you have to make sure you try and avoid putting yourself into those sorts of positions. But that was football, and then things like NBA. We decided using models to give NBA and running a go. Some horrendous working hours. People don't realise that some of these sports you have to give them a go, because if you can make them successful, the upside is so big. So sometimes you're not sure whether you can make them pay, but you have to give them a go. And NBA was one of those, and we didn't make it pay. And there was a lot of there's not much sleep going on and everything else. But that's just an example. But yeah, so that's...
Okay, now you've been for a decade quietly getting yourself a nice few quid, but you've started on Twitter. You've started a 100-day thread, and then you've agreed to do this interview. So obviously you've decided to stick your head above the parapet a bit. Why have you suddenly decided to do that now?
Well, I like to come out of the comfort zone occasionally, but no. So there were actually sort of 2 or 3 triggers to it. So one was, I remember being in the car on the way back from Cheltenham races a couple of months ago, and brother's friend, who's a currency trader in the city, he likes golf, but he's not a great golfer by any stretch of imagination. And he was telling me that he'd played this course, and he'd played at the Wisley and Swinley Forest, a couple of courses that are quite tricky to get on, and he had a friend who's a member at St George's Hill, and he said, hopefully I'll be playing Queenwood soon. Now, if you don't know, Queenwood's a very exclusive golf club, very, very difficult to get on. And what it made me realise is that contacts, in terms of doing some of the things you enjoy, like playing golf, you need to put yourself out there a little bit more in terms of actually making some interesting contacts. So that was the first part, and the whole process sort of has been some time in coming. And the other part was, I decided, lockdown happened, and I decided I would offer. So a large part of what I talk about on the Twitter thread are things like incentives. So one thing I wanted to do it was back end of last year now, was do a high profile weight loss bet with someone where both parties would be gaining significantly from it. So it's not a traditional bet where if I achieve this, I win this. It would be a case of if both parties hit the sort of agreed weight loss, that it'd effectively be a push and no one wins, no one loses financially, but both parties would be beneficiary of having lost a significant amount of weight. And so I thought, someone's going to love to do this, but one of the provisions was that it was for an amount of money that made them uncomfortable, which was to really incentivize them to do it. So if I said to you, for £100, would you do this? You might say no, right? If I said £5,000, you might go, maybe, maybe not. Now, if I said 20% of your net worth, I might be beginning to garner your attention a little bit more. And so I think everyone has a point where their incentives line up with, what's going on. And that was a situation with myself where I was happy because I know that the pandemic's not been great in terms of things like health and that sort of thing. And, I was conscious that I wanted to put this out there, this weight loss bet. And, because I knew that it was probably going to be the most positive EV bet I've ever placed in terms of your future health and everything else. And if you only have 47 Twitter followers at the time, because you've used Twitter for 10 years and you very rarely actually post, you suddenly realise that you don't actually have a platform. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if you don't actually have a platform to tell people about things, it's very difficult. So it's something that's been in the back of my mind that I needed more of a platform for these sorts of things. And so, that was another sort of trigger point. And the final sort of point with regard to it was, this is an industry that is pretty questionable morally, I think, in terms of if you're playing at exchanges, you might be playing against syndicates, but ultimately, you're winning money from less fortunate people, should we say, and if same with bookmakers are making their, you might be making money off bookmakers, but bookmakers are making their money off, let's say, mugs, for want of a better phrase. So there's a lot of pretty questionable aspects to this industry, and I felt that if I could give something back, albeit a small thing, then it could only be a good thing. So that's how it all sort of came about.
Okay, now I've trawled through. You're only about half. You're not even halfway through it, are you? I've trawled through.
Don't worry. I had a friend who hadn't seen it before, and he said he read them for over an hour. I was like, good sleeping material.
Well, no, I've got some questions which are hopefully quite good. So now, you say there is a need to be really clear about the scalability of any betting that you do. First of all, tell me what scalability is, and then can you explain why there's a real need for it to be clear?
Okay, so if you're going to be serious about betting, if you said to me, what market should I look at betting on if I want to have, a go early on in my sort of betting career, you'd pick the smaller side markets where the syndicates aren't playing in them because they're not worth their while, or they're sports where, models haven't been produced, or, that type of stuff. So it might be like booking markets or, tournament match bets in golf, or any of these much smaller markets. Now, special bets, let's say, for example, you have a great return on your investment. So say you can make 10% on every bet you place on certain markets. Okay, and across a year, you placed £100,000 worth of bets, you've got your 10% margin, your expected return, 10k. Now, the problem you have is when you're betting on the smaller markets, is you'll lose accounts very quickly. And you'll get flagged up because these bets stand out quite significantly. And your future is pretty limited in terms of playing on those markets. So what you have to do is try and go to markets where your return on your investment will be a lot lower, but you can get much higher volume on. So let's say I have a 2% edge on a market, but I can get £1 million on. Suddenly I'm making, expected returns 20,000. So whilst, a much lower return on investment, potentially making a lot more money. So if you want to have a long-term future in the game, you have to be attacking markets where you can get the volume down.
Right. So although you obviously you found the scalability on golf. Are there any other sports you consider inefficient and scalability's not been tried on yet?
Not that I'm willing to talk about.
Oh, you pro punters, you're also secretive. Okay, what part of the pro punting skill set is core to all the sports you've mentioned to your success? So is there something about each sport that you can nail, which means you'll be successful at all of them?
It's a very simple thing. So is you have to find an edge. So, you know, you can have the best mentality in the world, you could have the best discipline, you could be great at getting bets on, you can be great in so many aspects of betting. But if you don't have an edge, it doesn't matter. So everything in betting is about finding an edge, whatever that edge is, and then you have to have the skill set of all the other things to then capitalize on that edge. But if you don't have an edge, you're not going to make money unless you're very lucky.
Okay, now you've mentioned you took a foray into pro punting in 2002, 2003, become a pro punter in 2012. So why did it take you a decade to have a go?
I think I was burnt first time round. I think there's quite a lot of scar tissue in terms of first time round, and then you're in a job, you're comfortable, and as time goes on, you gradually build up your betting again. As time goes on, as you're earning more money and this sort of stuff, and it takes time. And sometimes you need a push to really take the opportunity, take another chance in terms of going for it. And leaving Betfair was sort of being pushed into making some tough decisions, and the decision I made, and sort of happy with it. So.
Okay, so were you a punter throughout your career at Betfair?
A good chunk of it. So there'd be times early on, particularly, where I wouldn't be doing huge amounts, but there were certainly other times where you're doing, plenty of punting.
So when did you, I mean, you may not have even realised, your mindset changed from being punter to professional?
I think what you end up with is nothing can prepare you until you are actually doing it for a living and it's your sole income. So I saw Patrick talking the other day where he was saying best piece of advice he'd give someone would be to make sure you have another job whilst you're doing it, you're learning the ropes, getting the experience, because once you do it full time and you don't have any other sources of income, it's a hugely different type of pressure. In terms of the sort of transition from, a few bets here and there to being a pro punter, I think you end up taking a lot less sort of, for want of a better phrase, sort of muggy type bets. There's a lot of mug bets that bookmakers are quite happy for you to take, and you end up, you learn to avoid those sorts of bets.
Okay, so once you're locked into that professional punter mindset, can you adapt to any form of winnable gambling if you put the work in?
I think you're in a situation now, 10 years down the line, where you have a much better skill set to be able to potentially do that. But coming back to what we were talking about earlier, where you have to be able to find an edge. So I used to love playing poker. Poker's a very difficult, area now to get an edge, because you have so many other things going on, like collusion and lots of nefarious activities, certainly with poker, where it's pretty difficult to get an edge. And it doesn't matter how good your skill set is, you're unlikely to be able to beat it. And I think that, I think it doesn't translate as easily as that. Ultimately, whether it be poker, whether it be daily fantasy sports, it doesn't matter what it is you have to find an edge. And how you find that edge, it's tough on other activities. It's not as simple as saying, I have this skill set, I can translate it from one area to another. It just doesn't, in my experience, certainly, it doesn't work like that.
It's just a perpetual edge-finding battle then, basically.
Yeah. It's one way to describe it.